he's the kind of fantasy player that you're like, if you're going trick or treating and you go to a dentist's house and they're like, "Oh, here's a toothbrush for you." It's like that's somewhat useful, but it's not exciting if you're going out trick or treating. You want candy. You don't want that toothbrush, man.
Halloween, if you couldn't tell, is right around the corner. You and I might be a little bit too old to go trick or treating, but we can help fantasy managers with a little bit of trick or treat, I'd like to think. So let's talk about some players, some fringe guys who fantasy managers are maybe not so hot on, maybe not so cold on, but let's give them a little prognostication moving forward. So let's start right now with Joe Flacco, who's now dealing with a little bit of a shoulder injury, hurt at the end of the Jets game, week 8. What can fantasy managers expect from Joe Flacco moving forward?
Yeah, I would say he's going to be a treat if we're going trick or treat here. I like his potential. He's built immediate chemistry with Jamar Chase. It's going to give him a high floor most weeks. Now, I get it. The shoulder injury is a little bit concerning. If he doesn't play this week, you're not going to want to add him now. But the Bengals having a terrible defense and needing to throw a lot to kind of keep pace in those games, it's going to give Flacco a high volume each week. He kind of, if you're looking for a candy comparison to him, he's kind of like the Hershey bar of fantasy quarterbacks. Maybe he's unspectacular, but he's solid and reliable when you got him on the field. So you pick him up and just start him if you need help at quarterback.
All right, Jacob, let's head out to the AFC West. And Kamani Vidal has been a guy who's been in circles a little bit. He's surprising. Is he a trick or a treat?
He's a treat. He's a guy when I watch him play, I really like him. He's excellent in pass protection, and that's going to allow him to stay on the field. And he's totaled at least 117 rushing yards in 2 of his 3 starts this year. The lone time he didn't was against the Colts, who have one of the better defenses in the league. So I think with that in mind and with how Vidal is playing, he's going to be their lead back, making him a volume base 2 until Amarian Hampton returns. Maybe the Chargers trade for a guy, but I don't think it'll be someone who will take over for Vidal at this point. So, I get that people be worried about Hampton returning, but until then, Vidal is like a juicy drop pop. Eventually it'll run out, but it'll be good until the last drop.
Yeah, I can't with you. I simply cannot. All right, let's head over to Tennessee. A little Tennessee trick or treat here. That's running back Tony Pollard, Jacob. And is he a trick or a treat? What can fantasy managers expect moving forward?
Yeah, he's sort of a trick at this point in his career. He's a talented player, but he's playing on a bad team and in a bad situation for him because the Titans are going to be looking towards the future, and that's going to be taking a look at Tyjae Spears, who's 24 years old, and he started to outsnap Pollard a little bit. Over the last 3 games, Spears has 96 snaps, Pollard has 89. So that's not looking like a positive relationship there for Pollard. Probably going to be at best a 50-50 split. And, if Spears looks as explosive as he's looked, he did pretty well in his action against the Colts. That could relegate Pollard to backup details. So I think he's a guy you can keep on your bench, but if you need to drop him for someone, especially as bye weeks kick up, don't feel too bad about it. It's sort of like he's the kind of fantasy player that you're like, if you're going trick or treating and you go to a dentist's house and they're like, "Oh, here's a toothbrush for you." It's like that's somewhat useful, but it's not exciting if you're going out trick or treating. You want candy. You don't want that toothbrush, man.
Yep, I knew a guy who used to give out nickels. So that's, money's nice, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, Jacob, sticking with the running back theme here. And unfortunate injury to Cam Scatterbo has now firmly put the spotlight on Tyrone Tracy in the Giants' backfield. Is he a trick or a treat for fantasy managers?
I have him as a treat. It seems like everyone, because of Scadaboo's success, has forgotten that Tracy was pretty good last year. He ended up with 1,123 yards during his rookie season, just 5 touchdowns. But he's going to be the workhorse now. Last season, from week 7 on, he averaged 15.6 touches per game, while Devin Singletary got 6.2. So you don't really have to worry about Singletary taking work for him. In the Halloween world, we're talking about Tracy as a full-size M&M, and Singletary is kind of the fun size. So, that's going to make Tracy a solid volume-based RB2, who in good matchups could probably work into the top 15 just based on the sheer volume of carries he'll be getting.
A lot of uncertainty surrounding Joe Mixon this season, Jacob. What is he, a trick or a treat moving forward?
He's the classic fantasy trick because you're looking at him and you're saying, man, if Joe Mixon could just get back on the field, he'll be great. He could be an RB1. And that's absolutely true, but we just have no idea when or if he'll be back. D'Amico Ryans hasn't had an update on him. He most recently spoke about him, I believe, on October 27th and just said he didn't have any more news. We should be hearing something soon, but until we do, it's just kind of not worth having Mixon around. He's kind of like the myth of the house on Halloween that has those full-size candy bars. You're always looking for it and you're saying, "Oh, if I could just find it, it'll be great." But often the journey of looking for it isn't worth it because you can't ever really find it. So Mixon kind of feels like fool's gold at this point.
All right, Jacob, let's head down to Jacksonville and a guy who has made all the headlines for being a two-way player, but maybe hasn't quite lived up to expectations yet is Travis Hunter. Is he a trick or a treat?
He's probably a trick at this point as well. I know he broke out against the Rams. I know that'll lead people to have a lot of hope for him in the second half of the season. But over the first 6 games, he averages 32.8 receiving yards per game. And it's still not exactly clear how the Jaguars are going to use him on both sides of the ball. It could vary greatly from week to week. So for fantasy owners, it's inconsistent. And that's one of the worst things you can have in fantasy. And what I say, it's like if you like Starburst and you only like the pink or red and you're reaching into a bag, you want the pink or red, but there's a 50% chance you're going to get yellow or orange. And if you don't like those, it's not worth it. That's sort of what he is right now. He's that 50-50 proposition because he's playing on both sides of the ball. If he has a game where he plays more cornerback than receiver, he's going to be pretty much useless in fantasy perspective.
Let's head out to Denver, Jacob. I can't. Again, this is ridiculous. Let's head out to Denver, Jacob, and wide receiver Troy Franklin. Is he a trick or a treat?
I think he's a treat. I think he's moving into that territory where he's built up enough chemistry with Bo Nix. I mean, he's been targeted, I think, just 2 fewer times than Cortland Sutton this season. So him and Nix are kind of like he's the peanut butter to Bo Nix's chocolate in a Reese's cup. So they're forming this trustworthy connection. And so that's going to make Franklin a matchup based flex. Now, you're not going to want to start him, for example, this week against the Texans. That's a terrible matchup. The Texans are excellent against receivers. But against weaker teams like we saw against the Cowboys, Franklin's going to be a guy you want in your lineup. So feel free to pick him up. Feel free to trust him. He's one of the dudes on the waiver wire that could be a real treat for you in the second half of the year.
And last on your trick or treat list, Jacob, the last house on the block. Let's talk about Oronde Gadsden. Right, he's a guy who broke. He seems to be developing some pretty good chemistry with Justin Herbert. What's your take on Oronde Gadsden? Is he a trick or a treat?
He's a treat. I absolutely love his skill set and pairing with Justin Herbert because Justin Herbert, throughout his career, has always loved throwing to tight ends, and he hasn't really had one as talented as Gadsden in a while. He's shown off great separation skills in recent weeks and just has a knack for getting open. And he's not the biggest tight end, but he has everything that you need to be a quality player at the position. And we talk about this often. Tight end's pretty weak in fantasy. It's stronger this year than years past. But I really think Gadsden could emerge as as an elite option there. He's sort of the Kit Kat of fantasy tight ends. You look at it and you say, man, that is the candy I want. That is the guy I want on my team. I'm going to plug him in and just see what happens there.